My name's Jonathan Mark. I'm with Flyby News. Since the 1999 Cassini Earth Flyby, we've been looking at events in space. And because we started working with Carl Grossman in exposing a high-risk flyby of Earth by a Cassini space probe that had 72.3 pounds of plutonium on board. During that time, I got a call from Mr. Bart Jordan that isn't here right now, but we did an interview with him on June 25th, 2014 in Dover, where he explained how he was involved with the Manhattan Project from his early childhood times, where he started understanding the ancient Greek language and was able to decipher it to a code. Well, I've been looking for proof on all this, as you would imagine, and there's a lot of evidence that I found in 15 years. But today we have a special guest, Harry Jordan, that has come, that was involved with the Mars Project. And Harry, it's great for you to be here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jonathan.
How'd you get involved with the Mars Viking mission, and what was your background? And then we'll get into Bart. But Harry Jordan, you're not related to Bart.
No, I'm not. Since I've met him for the first time, we both only knew about each other not too long ago, but we both worked at separate ends, and it's been an extraordinary experience talking with Bart. And my involvement began back in 1976, actually, because I love to follow the space missions, and I was curious about the Viking images, and the World Herald carried a story on it, carried several, in fact, and they carried one in particular in 1985.
Well, in 1976, how'd you become interested in the space program? What was your field and interest?
Well, I was an architect and an engineer, and I was a teacher at Creighton Preparatory School in Omaha, Nebraska.
All right.
And I'd been teaching there for 35 years. And in fact, I started there in 1976, so it was kind of an historical day for me, a historical day for the country and the Viking mission. And I'd always been interested in space since I was a kid. In the Navy, I was in radar intelligence and CIC. And we also had to be lookout experts and recognition experts, so we were involved in navigation and shooting the stars and using sextants and things like this. And nowadays we of course have GPS, but we didn't have it in those days. We had a dead reckoning tracer, sextant, a compass, and a slide rule, and we also had vector guides that were on plastic boards that we navigated by. So my job was to take care of air search, to take care of finding out where aircraft were and being able to determine where ships were on the ocean.
Now, in 1976, this is like pre-internet times.
Yes, it is, and this is a very important thing because during the 60s, I worked with analog equipment. The mechanisms that we used, even on our repeaters, which are the original cathode ray tube machines, I worked with surface search radar, and I worked with, meaning that ground type radar and air radar designed to see aircraft. We could change the polarity, and on the ship I was on, which is the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, we were the very first ship to carry atomic weapons, and we were the very first ship to test these new radar systems.
Wow. So what did you see in 1976 with the, I mean, were you
that
reading
was
articles?
in the 60s. That was in the 60s, from 1961 through 1967, when I was discharged in December of 65, I'm sorry. And then in the 70s is when I just always been interested in science and engineering and things. And I saw this article in the World Herald, which told a story about Dr. C. Wes Churchman at Peace and Conflict Study at Berkeley in California. He was a Nobel Laureate, and he was pulling together a team to investigate these strange features that they found on the surface. The face on...
Did they publish it right away when this face and this other information?
Oh no, not at all. The face was kind of a giggle factor around the country and among scientists and also at NASA, except it was not a giggle factor for Bart Jordan. I was not in contact with him at that particular time because he was a very young boy he was a young man in the 70s and 60s, but prior to that, 40 years before Viking even got off the ground. And I think this is important for people to understand. Bart Jordan is an extraordinary gift to mankind, and he has been kept under the radar for so long. And it is a travesty. I hope you don't mind me digressing here, but I think
No, but I still want to understand when you started realizing there was something more to this 1976 mission than what the initial reports were about.
Yes, because
what led to you realizing there was something there?
I talked to Dr. Churchman on the phone, and I told him that the images that I saw, there was something in them that just moved me, because I could not believe that NASA had not made any statements regarding not just the face, but the artifacts that were to the west. In those two images that they did release to the public at that time were two frames, 35A72 and 70A13. The 70th orbit, the designate for Viking 1, and the 13th image that was taken. Then on the same Viking 1 spacecraft, the 35th revolution of the planet, it's going over in a polar orbit, and the 72nd image. And he suggested that they needed somebody. Dr. Churchman said, I'll put you in touch with Richard Hoagland, and we can see what we can do here, because we do need somebody to model this area in this region. We are trying to obtain funds for NASA to do return missions to the planets, and to Mars in particular, to further research these areas, and we want an independently created set of recognition drawings, intelligence drawings, if you will, or of what I was a recognition expert in the Navy, not just from radar, but for photography. Okay? The photographs that were taken over Cuba were taken by aircraft from the Franklin D. Roosevelt and other ships. Well, anyway.
Who's Richard Hoagland?
Richard Hoagland was a science advisor to Walter Cronkite, CBS News, and these were during the early Gemini and Apollo missions. Richard C. Hoagland acquired his erudition regarding science and other images, and he was leading up part of the team at Berkeley, and Dr. C. Wes Churchman had a $250,000 grant to further look into this so that they could present their case to the Senate for funds for a return mission to Mars. Richard C. Hoagland worked with Thomas Rautenberg, Dr. Randy Pozos, and worked with others. Interestingly enough, an astronaut, Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a science advisor to Reagan at the time. Okay, and he was also on the faculty at Columbia and worked with Dr. Sagan.
So what did he think about these images? Did he talk to you? He must have been interested.
Yes, I met with, and I was the guy that picked Dr. Brian O'Leary up at the airport in Lincoln, Nebraska, and when we had a conference in 1988, a few years before he died and passed away. And I hung with him for 3 days at this conference, within which they had a very interesting conference in Lincoln, Nebraska, is where our producer, Linda Perrin, picked me up for the NETV show, and I presented some of my stuff from those recognition drawings. I had done the first large recognition drawing ever done on that area, and a model that I produced over 2.5 years, but I couldn't talk about it. This is what I was told, as long as I was willing to do it pro bono, and I did do it pro bono, okay? It was an extraordinary time in my life. I just started teaching, and I couldn't speak of it at school, and on April 1st, they asked me to do a little experiment, so they wanted me to take those images to school on April Fool's Day. They thought that would be a good time to present it to some students and faculty. So I went into the faculty room and just laid them on the table to see what, science teacher would come in and, what's that, "Oh, Harry, you're playing one of your jokes again," you know. And no, it wasn't. But and so I made up a report, and I sent my drawings in a sealed tube to this guy named Dan Drayson at Scottsdale, Arizona, where Hoagland was composing a show for a showcase for their case for funds for a return mission under Dr. C. Wes Churchman's grant in Scottsdale, Arizona. Except I didn't send my model. And the reason was I found out that Dan Lieberman, who had worked on some of the models for the movie Blade Runner, they were going to do a vacuum form of my model and it would have destroyed it. Nobody told me they were going to do that, so I didn't send it. And then here's the real weird part.
Okay.
I was told to stop work. Now here I'm giving...
Who told you that?
Richard Hoagland.
And did somebody tell him to tell you this?
I don't know.
Well, why would he say this to you?
But the thing was that at the same time I received negatives from Dick Hoagland he got from Dr. Mark Carlotto, who was working for Task Corporation, and I found out Task Corporation had a contract with the Air Force out of the Pentagon. Now you can let your wheels start turning on that one. I'm not even going to go near it.
So you were maybe getting too effective in showing this information to the public.
Yes.
They didn't like that.
I mean, I'm this school teacher from Nebraska. What do I know except they don't... A lot of people in the works for the independent study of the Mars anomalies in the background was going on, formed by Dr. C. Wes Churchman. Now, you know, he's a Nobel Laureate. Well, one person who was always in the background, you can't imagine. I mean, this goes back to, and we got to say it, if you're going to talk about Cydonia and you're going to write about it in all of the portfolios, in all of the journals, in all of the websites on this, if you don't talk about Trinity and the development of the atomic bomb, you're not really covering what Cydonia is about, because it's a message to the human race.
Now, when did you realize this?
When I was working on my model.
Really?
And when I first met Bart Jordan, Professor Jordan, I call him professor because that's what he is. Yeah. He is a genius of the highest order, and he is a treasure. He's a national treasure, and he has been kept under the radar, and I should reiterate that, kept under the radar since his birth, and as a young boy was endowed with these unbelievable gifts of language, mathematics. He was even taken by a rabbi and a priest to meet with Dr. Einstein before the atomic bomb, because his abilities in translating the frequencies of the Greek alphabet, the real Greek alphabet. The Greek alphabet is older even than Aramaic, okay? Older than cuneiform. Its source is and comes from human history. Human history is at stake here in a very large way, because on Mars, within the Cydonia region, which comes from the Greek word Cydonis, by the way, which means seed. Humans didn't come from Mars and seed Earth. It was the other way around. And it happened 500,000 years ago. And we know why it's 500,000 years ago, because the mathematical alignments according to the planetary obliquity and the magnetic, what would have been the magnetic north here on Earth, there's no magnetic field on Mars. In fact, there are several magnetic fields on Mars. And in order for you to have a planetary body of that size, even though half the size of Earth, you have to degauss its electromagnetic gyro effect from the core that's inside, okay? And our magnetic shift on Earth, in fact, I'm really worried about, because I'm a sailor, I have a boat, and I have to program my computer and reset my GPS in relationship to my compass and my autopilot in particular. We've had a 7.2 degree magnetic shift in the Earth's polarity in the past 3 years. Let me say that again.
Say that again.
A 7.2 magnetic shift in the past 3 years.
7.2 degrees.
In other words, if I hadn't reset and calibrated my GPS in relationship to my autopilot,
Right.
I'd be 300 miles off on where I'm going if it's 1,000 miles away.
Right. Wow.
Now, on Mars, there are several magnetic fields, and thank God for Mars Express and the European Space Agency, because they have not clouded the issues, if there were any, and I don't think so yet at the European Space Agency out of Paris, because they have a couple of people that used to work for NASA, but I get very concerned now because images that came from the Viking program are binary images. They were on celluloid, series of zeros and ones and tonalities, which Vince and Greg Molinar manipulated, and when they developed their starburst pixel interleaving technique, which is a fancy way of saying they could even out the tones coming back from an image like that.
Right.
And then Dr. Carlotto got involved from TASC when he came and did a shape from shading algorithm. His lab sent a negative to Richard C. Hoagland's team, first to Dr. C. Wes Churchman, and then I got a copy, I got the negative, and they're locked up in a safe in Omaha right now, still,
Wow.
40 years later.
Yeah.
You dig what I'm saying here?
And he's the one that told you to stop working on this.
Yes. No, anyway, that negative is the one that MIT produced that shows teeth in the face.
Oh.
Now, before that, and prior to that, you have just a high contrast image from 7813 from the Viking missions. Now, there is something to be said about this, because if you look at a Surratt painting and you're looking at colored dots, the only way, and you look at it closely, you have to step back from it to see the image.
Right.
If you're able to zoom in 1,000 times on a Viking image, you'll see a series of zeros and ones that make up those tonalities. Essentially, an advanced stage of semaphore that the satellite did, which was your first, now get this, their first scanner type of imageries, which predates your digital, okay? So we're talking about analog equipment here. We're talking about a binary system that has nothing to do with optics at this juncture, okay? The optics come later from a Maryland's lab. In short, we took, in order for me to do my recognition drawings, I got an idea, and Warren White was one of my parents at Creighton Prep, excuse me. And Warren also was on the Air Force team during the Gemini and Apollo missions. He helped develop the film. He developed those films and the Hasselblads the astronauts used. Right. And he was in Omaha, Nebraska, in White's Color Photo Studio. And so I went over there and talked to him, and we took those negatives and we enlarged them from NASA, from JPL. We enlarged them 50 times. Bigger.
Right. So
and we had to use, which meant that I took those 7813, 35A72, had about, well, did have 13 images actually that made up 35A72 mosaic, and then there's a 35A72 singular that was closer to the planet, because all those images were not taken from the same height around when they took those photographs. All right?
Okay.
And in order for you to get a complete picture, you have to have an overlap to get an orthographically corrected print, so that your measurements are accurate. Therefore, having some image much, much bigger in Omaha, they didn't do that in NASA at that time. We did it in Omaha, increased the accuracy of my recognition drawings. You understand what I'm saying, is that the accuracy, and only if one had done that and was on their hands and knees, and this is where it came into play here. They were saying that the images that were on the Viking frame was an illusion and a trick of light, shade, and shadow. on the face. Also the artifacts to the west of the face.
Right.
And I couldn't believe I just couldn't believe that somebody at NASA would parrot that kind of comment. So I went in and I was going to prove that that was not the case. And so I decided to construct a model over an area 720 square miles in the Cydonia region with a datum point right in the center, not too far from the face. And it would cover all around the face and then some. So that the idea was, and then I could, and while I was constructing the model using plasticine clay and lava rock and 16 gradations so I could get the color right, I could get the tone right, excuse me, so that when you took a black and white photograph, you could take that black and white photograph and put it right next to the Viking image, the image from JPL of 7813, as well as 35A72. And I had...
Now that's the orbit and the frame of the picture that was
yeah,
taken.
right. And I had lights in the studio in my basement so that the azimuth and shadows that were in those original frames, you understand, I took 2 years to make this model. And I was on my knees and I was making sure that those shadows would be cast by the forms that I did. Point being, those three-dimensional forms on the surface were making those shadows. Now I'm working with triangles, right? I'm working with a parallel edge. I'm working with dividers. And then I began to notice something that convinced me that there was something there way beyond the face, way beyond the D&M pyramid.
Okay.
And this is still before I met Bart Jordan.
That's amazing. So what do you see?
There were 6 mesas that were hexagon shaped that were 3.6 kilometers apart, and there were 6 sets of them across the lowland regions in the Cydonia plain, consistent with pylons you would put to put a bridge work across it.
Okay. So it's very symmetrical and
yes,
and architectural.
It was architecture, it was engineering, it was surveying. Then there was a tholus, or which we could call a mound like in Wiltshire, England, that's a spiral volute, and it bore on something extraordinary. When I took my 30, 60, 90 triangle to work in this region, just to draw a line, I was just stunned, just absolutely stunned when I saw this alignment. 140, 90 degrees out. And there were 9 mesas that lined up their points that were pointing to the south-southwest. Each one of these mesas has a different shape, okay? Yep. Each one of these mesas has a different height. Each one of these mesas has a different direction or axis, if you will. And then they were in a straight rhumb line. I'm a sailor, you know about rhumb lines and data points. If you set up a theodolite and an engineer wants to do a straight line bridge, and then he'll send somebody down there a quarter mile, and then he'll have another a measuring stake where he will figure out the topography of the results in a theodolite. Well, I had my students make one of these in class, and these things run about $10,000, $20,000, you know, nowadays. Wow. Because they're using lasers. Yeah. Okay, well, we weren't using lasers. Understand, all this is going on predates computers.
Right. Okay.
The recognition drawings that the research lab is using, the work I was doing was all analog. Yeah. Which means that analyzing something and logging in your journal your results. Okay? Right. People hear that word today and they just, well, you know, whatever, you know, but that is a process that is extremely important and scientific, and we need to understand this. Those lined up, and the distances between them, and the length of the rhumb line to the right eye of that face, which is 1,500 feet high. Think of that for a minute, and 1.5 miles wide. and 1.5 miles long.
Huh.
That's significant too, as a measurement. Connects into translation. If people know the numerical values and the mathematical powers of the ancient Greek language, is an extraordinary palindromic form and message, palindrome form, for the human race. In fact, reciprocal resonance, and then also your frequencies that reflect the value, mathematical value of these Greek letters, form a sacred star halo.
Uh-huh.
That sacred star halo has to do with the 7 planets and the 7 semitone spans and the trichords of the music of the spheres. Now, the music of the spheres was not conceived by Copernicus. He is talking about harmony, harmonia, the spiral volute of Harmonia's necklace in ancient Greek mythology. By the way, Mars, the god of war, is not just a mythological concept embedded in the Greek classics. It is about, and here it is, the story about a real event that occurred. They had a nuclear war on Mars, and this message is on the Cydonia plain to tell us that we did it. We violated the light, the tholus that is there.
Right. Well, Bart always says our future's in the past with no escape present.
Correct. And he's
that's what he
absolutely
means.
right. I'm here to tell you that Bart Jordan is the real deal. When you see him at first, even as a young man, he looked kind of strange to people because one eye went out this way and he had vision problems. But his erudition and his knowledge, you can explain it in any way you want to, reincarnation or whatever, but that doesn't even do it because there's no way. I understand. I'm just here. I'm sitting here talking to you, but it's only been 7 days since I met a man that produced papers and drawings and the first calculations for the moons of Mars that wound up in British Britannica back in the 60s.
Right.
Long before Viking got off the freaking ground. Where did he get those numbers? Where did he get those numbers? I know where he got them, but I'm not going to tell anybody because everybody's been after Bart since then. I know where they got them, where he got them. But so what? That doesn't make that has nothing to do with anything. What really has to do is that you have to pay attention to Bart when he speaks to you because these facts and these numbers are real and they work. Now, they didn't listen to him when they developed the atomic bomb because, this sacred star halo is the schematic for the atomic bomb because within it is U-239. Within it are the atomic weights and the sacred elements, which tell you a story to stay away from cesium and don't do this again. Now that Cassini flyby was the dumbest damn thing NASA ever did. Excuse me, but I'm saying it again.
I'm glad.
It's the dumbest damn thing they ever did.
Yeah.
I'm a Navy man, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm glad I was trained up at OCS in Newport, Rhode Island. Check the record. Oh, by the way, I can't find my record.
Uh-huh.
I can't find my record.
Why
Bart also worked with Air Sea Rescue.
Right.
He's a veteran. Now, you've got 2 veterans here trained by this country, and we're both real patriots. I never accepted, and I vehemently oppose anybody who claims that I did. Never accepted a dime from any research group, any defense contractor, anybody connected, ever, under any circumstances. I've always done this pro bono on my own. I didn't get on TV or write a book about this research material for money.
Right.
I'm a plain old school teacher and right now a plain old retired veteran in Nebraska, living with a wonderful woman who's put up with all this shit all these years, Linda.
Thank goodness.
And she's the daughter of a barber out there, Jack Anderson, and I just dearly love her very much. We've been together 48 years, and I never ever would ever do anything to hurt her, except when we had our pictures taken when I was working on this project. That's another thing. Interagency cars from Offutt Air Force Base were following me, and I contacted Senator Kerry, who was chairing the House Intelligence Committee, and told him about it, and he stopped. But then a week later, guess what happens? I get a knock on my door in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's an Air Force intelligence officer in civilian clothes, and I asked him point blank. I didn't know he was an intelligence officer when he was at my door. I said, you know, I'm going to ask you, you wanted to say you heard that I was the Mars man guy, and I did this, and I was on educational television. You say that. I said, but I want to ask you, because he looked military, up one side 6 ways a Sunday. Yeah. He was too polished. And I said, are you with any, and he got kind of red in the face, and I said, well, I need to see your ID, sir, before I let you in my house. Yeah. And he was Air Force intelligence out of the Pentagon.
Wow. You smelled him out.
This is the first time that I've ever gone public with this kind of thing.
Uh-huh. And you also received an anonymous letter that was sent to you anonymously that claimed that they were following you and your wife when you were traveling.
Yes, I received somebody wanted to let me know, maybe it was one of my former students, because I have had a lot of students over 42 years. I taught in college, in Monroe College, and I taught at Oakland U, and I took classes there, and then that's another whole issue there. But and every once in a while I'll get something in the mail or a phone call or an email. So hear this, people. I got a lot of friends who know I'm here. Yeah. And if the same kind of devils that are out there that used to work for Loomis and the Rand Corporation, hello, we're out there. Real veterans who are concerned about the way the space... Now, veterans, military people, not just in the Pentagon, these are real Americans who are patriots. Long before that so-called Patriot Act, what a joke that is, that are concerned about where our programs are going, and the industrial mechanisms that work here all seem to support. They all support the mechanisms for making war. Now, there was an Iron Mountain report that was done before Kennedy was assassinated, and I'm sure everybody's heard about it. It also...
What's the Iron Mountain report?
The Iron Mountain report is a report about a report to investigate whether war is a necessity and whether democracy can survive in a system that is not war-based.
Right.
And there were several scientists that were in Iron Mountain when this report, and it was required reading at the Citadel and the Naval Academy and West Point, and I have written a lot of letters of recommendation over the years for my students to go to these military academies, okay? And 2 days after the Kennedy assassination, they were removed from all the libraries.
Really? And
off the required reading list for guys that were, and gals that were studying to become officers. Okay?
Yeah. And Kennedy wanted to get rid of the CIA and the military-industrial complex with
well,
peace
he was not the only one.
Yeah.
Roosevelt warned us about it.
Yeah.
Reagan warned us about it. And then also Harry S. Truman.
Well, I have one correction. It was 1947 that Bart met Einstein. He was 10 years old. So it was after the atomic bomb explosion.
Right.
And I guess Ivan van Sertima documented it in his book. They came before Columbus, because Bart did a correlation of the pyramids in South America and Africa.
I stand corrected on that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And he wrote that Bart had this prodigy skills that met Einstein for hours. Did you know more about that meeting? And can you kind of connect why the star halo and Mars has the design of the atomic bomb?
Yes. It's based upon the same theory, the time trinity and the location of the D&M pyramid, the Jupiter pyramid.
Which is called DEM because of the founders.
It's called the D&M because Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar were the two image specialists who worked with the first Viking images.
Right.
And in tandem with Tobias Owen.
Now, did they know about Bart? They must have, or did they?
Yes, they did. In fact, Vince thought that because Bart was older, Vince thought that Bart was kind of off the wall because Bart was very concerned about the observer mission.
Uh-huh.
The observer mission was the follow-up mission was the follow-up mission to the Viking mission.
Right.
And the observer had enough hydrazine to lower itself and in orbit had 2,000 pounds, taking a shot every 2-point-something seconds. So it could take much more than 66,000 images, which the Viking took. And I have all 66,000 images in an index in celluloid.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So I predate also the digital imagery era, so to speak. This is something that you need to go into much more detail, but I am going to show it to you here. Is a drawing of the drawing that Bart did, and underneath it are the sacred star halos, atomic numbers, okay, and the frequencies and the reflective responses to that. Now remember that image?
Yeah.
All right, now that's a predictive image that was done prior to this. That's the Trinity test. That image perfectly matches this Trinity test.
Right. Proportionately and angles and base.
And he did that when he was 7 years old.
Yeah.
Bart is the real deal here. And nobody knew about him, but Oppenheimer, everybody knew about him.
Yeah.
Well, hello, Mr. Loomis. They kept Bart in the background at a Trinity school in New York.
They gave him a code name by changing 2 letters of his name to Brat.
But changing a code name. And not only that, he conveyed and recorded for all time, for the first time, and I'm glad this is what's so charming about Bart, is that he saved proof of the fact that he did work on the atomic bomb and was the child prodigy with that. And it's from a photograph that was taken when he was in school. Now let me explain this. This tells you the mind of Bart. To the slide tells you the mind of Bart. Here's Bart Jordan right here. Okay?
Okay.
And he's in grade school, grade 3. Okay?
Yeah.
And this is at Trinity School. There's their logo. And his buddy down here at the bottom, okay,
Yeah.
Waterbury. Waterbury was his name, okay?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other names in there that are kind of interesting, but I won't get into it. And here he is, and notice that they both don't have ties on.
Right.
Well,
That's a big thing in that skull.
right. Now notice the angle of Waterbury and Bart. They both conjured up this, and the fact they practiced it, so when they went to get their school picture, that this would happen. The angle of the attack on these 2 guys, and then you draw a line over for the contour, for the circumference, that's 239 degrees, U-239. No ties with Trinity.
Yeah.
Trinity School, 239, and the element used in the make. So here he's no, I had absolutely no ties with Trinity and the atomic bomb, but in effect he's sending a message here in a code. That's how smart he's just absolutely astounding.
Because they told him that he wasn't working on a bomb. They always told him he was working on a test.
Right. He's letting the adults, these guff-bowers, take a look at this guy. Here is Loomis. Here is Trinity Tower. Now here's another thing I want to show you. See the tower?
Yeah.
Throughout his life, Bart was a student of Segovia, right?
Right.
And he gave concerts all over the world. During his entire life, he's under the radar, but everywhere he went, he left a message for the public so he can prove who he was. And now I want to show you this most remarkable drawing I've ever seen. And it's just absolutely a gas, because this is from a program he had
When he performed at Lincoln Center?
when he performed at Lincoln Center. And look, he's got his schematic. That is the schematic of the atomic bomb atop the tower at Trinity. And if you go in there with a scale, you can measure that.
This program, he told me that he identified the five-sided pyramid.
Yes, he did.
Can you show that?
Yeah, I'll show that to you just a second. Here's Loomis.
Because that was a year before the mission took off.
Yeah, and here's Loomis and Bart's mom.
Yeah, pretty.
When he was age 7. This is his drawing.
When he was 5.
When he was 5. And this is the Trinity explosion.
Yeah.
Look at those two. And this pattern here. Now, wait a minute. Here's something else that's quite remarkable, because this one, it really shook me up when I found it out. And I would never have known this. No one ever would have known this, not even the European Space Agency. They may not even know about it yet. In 2014, on October 14th, 2014, the trinity of the moon Phobos and its triquartal axial frequency and its distance from the core of Mars performed an alignment. And it performed an alignment directly over the D&M pyramid. And here is a copy.
Which Bart calls the Jupiter pyramid on Mars.
Yeah, the Jupiter pyramid, I'm sorry. The Jupiter pyramid. And here is that frame. Slide. This is the frame, and there's only 15 seconds in between each shot. Right. As the Mars Express ESA spacecraft came by in tandem Phobos, Phobos lined up directly behind what is there is Jupiter. That's Jupiter lining up behind Phobos.
Right.
And it performed an alignment, and I inserted the Jupiter pyramid, here it is here, under Phobos, all three.
Oh.
Time trinity.
Oh.
And there's the T again. Okay?
No ties to Trinity.
No tie to Trinity.
Yeah.
But here is proof, half a century later, that Bart is still here with us. The idea that lines up over that pyramid, the nettle bed, which is the home of Ian Fleming,
right,
is the oldest prime meridian in civilization's history. The prime meridian now is incorrect.
Right.
And Bart can prove it, and I'll let him prove that.
He says it's exactly 1 degree off.
It's exactly 1 degree off, right.
But that helped him create this place on Mars by the true
right, and we have since looked
meridian.
at that 51 degrees north, and there is a crater there that has been manipulated. Now, we've got to get some more detailed shots of it. In other words, folks, on Earth, there are duplicate references to everything. And I mean everything that's on Cydonia is on Earth.
Right.
It just boggles the mind what our students in our schools are not learning. It boggles the mind on how religious sects throughout history have denuded or covered or have even displayed the true facts about our human origins. And, knowledge and wisdom has power, and there are a lot of power brokers out there that like to keep it quiet. And Bart is a national treasure. I think he should be nominated for the Nobel Prize, and one good place that could do that would be the University of New Hampshire, because that's where he gave lectures in 5 different departments.
Right.
And the only reason he didn't become a professor is because he was a professional classical guitarist, studied under Segovia.
Right.
Now think about this for a minute.
And he was protecting his family by not being public.
And he was protecting his family by not being public. So the way to hide somebody like that is in plain sight.
Right.
And that's what they've done for years. Well, let me show you something here.
Okay.
This is a think of this now as a cross-section schematic. This is if you were to take a cut, and this one was done in 1988 when Bart had access finally to some graphic materials that could draw it much better than the tools he was using.
Right, and this was published in the New England Antiquities Research Association.
Yes, and in the Britannica has the distances from the core of the moons and their aspects were provided by Bart.
Right.
Okay?
I got that from them finally. You know, all this time I've had this Bart Jordan challenge because it's so incredible. But I was asking for someone, give me another explanation of where these numbers came from. Otherwise, I'm going to remain open to this wonderful story. And and I didn't even find this from a Britannica. I just assumed Bart was telling me the truth. But I finally dug it up.
Yeah, but people today, they don't believe he's telling. Now he's coming out, and he's much older, and he's living in an environment that's really not good. And
can you show some of those pictures?
Yes, I can show you where. And Bart gave me approval to do this, and I think that the public should see what kind of condition he is.
Yeah, because that's what gets you so.
That's what gets me so angry is because all these smiling up-cruster people that up there from the Hamptons and the great cliff walks, whatever you want to call it, the la-di-das, they got all the money in the world, but they don't have any moral values as far as I'm concerned. To put Bart in the background and treat him like a child, not only when he was a child, but when he became an adult, and putting him into the ranks of the military where they could hide him very well, great, and do his work for the country, great, but what about Bart? While they're all going off and making Rand Corporation wealthy and everything else, is really and has been on the shoulders of this man. And I am just absolutely furious about it.
And this
I'm not
is
angry.
The military-industrial complex.
The military-industrial complex of this planet.
Yeah.
And that's why they got stars born. You know that movie.
Yeah.
Little boy. Well, and Paul Newman looks at his shoulder. The human race don't outrank this.
Yeah.
Well, excuse me.
Yeah.
No, the human race doesn't outrank anything, not by the way they're behaving right now and what they did on Mars. They caused a nuclear war. And the message was left there on purpose, and we're still ignoring it.
Yes.
We're still ignoring it. I'm here to tell you, all right? And here is something else I'm going to show you. This is Bart and his buddy,
Albert.
Great, Albert. Isn't that great?
Two vets,
Albert Einstein.
Two vets.
No, it's too bad. But two vets, and then me, I'm the third of the three musketeers. Yeah. And there's Albert, has been watching his place because Bart's drawings his place was broken into. They took $2,500 of the part of his life savings and what he has left, and then he's living in this housing area, and Albert stays there. So nobody comes in and disturbs his work. And about his work, he's using a 50s calculator, folks. Yeah. And the computer is better than an XPS 9000, better than 100 XPS 9000s, I want to tell you. And here are his numerical, and make no mistake, he works with palindromic form. He works with palindromic mathematics lined up in linear patterns consistent with these resonant frequencies and numbers, unlike anything you've ever seen in your life. I don't care if you're a physicist dealing with quantum mechanics or you're a mathematician of world renown and have the, the angstrom medal like Richard C. Hoagland. Yeah. You can't compare to what Bart can do in just a moment. The human race, in our opinion, has been given a message. And it is a message that needs to be taken very seriously. And there are things going on in the world that need to be stopped, period. Putting the aluminum and barium in the atmosphere, you stop it. The HAARP that's gotten started, the electromagnetic and the heating up of our atmosphere, is the one that caused the ozone layer. When I was a young radar operator and we pointed that antenna in our rotation rate, about 6 rotation rate, 1.5 wavelengths, and we could polarize, we could point it at a cloud 20 miles away and dissipate it in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And if that cloud was at 35,000 feet, we could still do it. We could bounce a signal off the moon. 1962, folks. 1962. We used to fry hamburgers on the catwalk. Now,
I want to say something about Bart. He not only was a mathematical genius, but
yes,
he also had a way of channeling this information or just hearing it from, he didn't know where it came from. And then he would use the mathematics to see, to prove it to himself that he heard something. Mm-hmm. And then the numbers would turn out to be the symmetrical palindromes from right to left, left to right. Mm-hmm. And then he would know. And so he had both skills, math and
there are people out there, because of its orbital characteristics, even if you plug a computer in it, because of its distance from Mars, because of the plane of the ecliptic of Mars being slightly off, you know, and Uranus is way off because its south pole is facing the Earth, there's no way in hell you can figure to the hundredths of a second when to fire the hydrazine jets on the orbiter to get it around the planet so it doesn't crash into the planet. Unless what? You have a series of 6 numbers that can locate a body in 3-dimensional space.
Right.
What in the hell are numbers doing on a tablet 5,000 years old that have the same computer numbers that are on a Viking spacecraft? Asked Bart Jordan. Cydonia is the holy grail of our history. It means 1,000 times more than the Rosetta Stone that sat in front of the Sphinx for 10,000 years. And by the way, it is older than they have in that museum. Then you want to know the purpose of the Giza Pyramid vis-a-vis the message that's left in Cydonia? I'll tell you what it is. It's this. If you take a simple basketball and you flatten it, and you want to put a monument on that planet, you put it in the center of the landmass of the planet. On Earth, the Giza Pyramid is in Cairo. Cairo is the English word for Al-Qahira, Aramaic word, and Al-Qahira translated into English is Mars. And it's at 30 degrees latitude, 30 degrees longitude. And if you were going to be in a planet like Mars and you had something happen there and you wanted future generations to realize something bad happened, you put 2 moons in opposition at distances that are also reflective of frequencies in development of the atomic bomb, meaning that the distances of Uranus and Deimos interrelate and interconnect.
Phobos and Deimos.
Phobos and Deimos, I'm sorry. You know.
And that's the harmony of spheres.
Yes.
That's the next program that I'm going to do with Bart.
Okay. So, and scientists looked at those two and said, well, they shouldn't be there in that kind of opposition. They should have crashed to the surface 50 years ago. What the hell's going on there?
Yeah.
You know, Bart knows.
Yeah.
Bart knows.
So how'd you meet Bart? I mean, what brought you to him?
Oh, my goodness. That's another story.
Yeah.
After I did the TV program, within 2 days, I got a package in the mail from a professor or a Reverend Andre Cezanne, totally unknown to me. And it came from New Hampshire, Bart's friend. Ah. And as Bart has always stayed under the radar, he did in my case. Except it perked his interest enough, my lecture at the NAT television, and apparently he was my guardian angel, and he was watching over me, only I didn't know it. And within that packet, the time origin of the foot and decimeter papers,
Mm.
the sacred star halo,
Yeah.
the artifacts that would be found on Mars, drawings and diagrams and schematics that he did, including the numerical values of the harmony of the spheres, including the sacred star halo. No notes, no message, no writing, except one little note that said, from Dr. Cezad, and I won't say it here now, I'll let Bart tell you. But it was to see what I would do with
Right.
it.
Okay. And what'd you do?
Well, first of all, I didn't get any sleep for a week.
Well, that's familiar.
And understand, now I had a computer.
Uh-huh.
It's 1988. And so I digitized one of the images, and I went to a raster function on the software program using Photo Studio, and I was using an XP, I don't remember exactly what level computer, but, and then I could take and mask it and extrapolate an orthographic projection over the mesas that were there in those original photo images of Viking.
Okay.
And guess what?
Why?
Half a dozen of his images, half a dozen, right off the bat, perfectly, even though the mesas were highly eroded, even though we know they're several million years old, they overlap those mesas. Now, let me ask you this, and this would be a good one for the public. If Bart Jordan is not the genuine thing, the messenger from God, whatever, I think he's Enoch, the lost Enoch. Those images, there's no way that he would have known, and this is what's in my heart right now, and it just can't, I don't know any other way to convey the feeling other than this way. And here is really the proof in the pudding. Bart Jordan is practically blind.
Yeah.
He can't see the images. He didn't see the images until I came here 7 days ago. He can barely see. He walks with a cane that has a white tip on it. But he can get up close with his magnifying glass with those digital tapes you saw in that squalor with that 50s adding machine, and he can still do his science.
Yeah.
His real science.
Yeah.
It can't come from anywhere else. And you know,
It's like Homer. Homer was blind.
and he is like a child. I mean, it's just, it brings tears to you. I mean, I did tear up a couple of times during a couple of our sessions, but he couldn't see it.
Yeah.
But how do you explain that? NASA? How do you explain that, NASA? They perfectly overlap those images, and they've got mathematical values. There's a message there in each one of them. And they're telling us that Mars, the god of war, is not about a mythological events in Greek classics. It is about a real event that occurred on the planet 500,000 years ago.
So you're saying Bart's been used and abused.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Alexander Payne, who was a former student of mine, by the way, who won the Oscar for his movie All About Schmidt, he would be the perfect one to write Bart's story.
Let's go for it. It's time. He calls himself a time singer, and now I am understanding what that really means. And he's saying all throughout history, there were people that understood what happened long ago that passed this information forth, and it's a scientific-based information.
Correct.
And that's where the pyramids and all this artifacts, the Göbekli Tepe, respond to.
Right.
That's so fascinating. I mean, truth is better than fiction, isn't it?
It is, you know.